The sun hung low over the Arizona plains, stretching shadows long across the parched earth. Heat shimmered above the ground, bending the horizon into a wavering mirage. Rancher Cole Maddox rode slowly along the creek that cut through his land, a rare ribbon of water in the dying heat of late summer. His horse snorted, thirsty and restless, but Cole's eyes were drawn to something else: movement by the water's edge. At first, he thought it was a coyote or a wild mare. Then he saw pale skin flash between the reeds. He froze in the saddle, heart pounding. There, kneeling in the shallows, was a woman, her hair dark and tangled, her dress soaked and torn. She was washing something, blood maybe had off her arms. Her shoulders bore thin, cruel scars that weren't the work of any accident. Cole instinctively turned his horse away, ready to give her the privacy any decent man would. But the woman suddenly looked up and saw him. Her eyes, wide, green, and filled with terror, locked onto his. For a moment, the entire world seemed to stop. Then she whispered, voice breaking like brittle glass, "I took it off. Please." Her trembling hands clutched at her torn dress, trying to cover herself, though modesty was the least of her worries. The desperation in her tone struck Cole deeper than any weapon could. He dismounted slowly, raising both hands to show he meant no harm. The air between them was thick with fear, hers and something heavier in him, pity mixed with unease. He didn't speak right away. Words felt dangerous, fragile things. Instead, he took off his worn brown coat and held it out. She hesitated, eyes darting toward the forest beyond the creek, as if expecting someone to appear from the shadows. When she finally stepped forward to take the coat, Cole saw how thin she was, bones too close to the surface, lips split and dry. She wrapped herself in the heavy garment like it was armor. Cole asked softly, "You lost?" The woman shook her head, clutching the coat tighter. "No," she murmured, voice barely audible. "Running." That word told him more than any name or story could. Out here, people didn't run unless something or someone had made life unbearable. He glanced at the distant trail, half expecting riders to appear on the ridge. The woman followed his gaze, then stepped back like a spooked animal. "You can rest at my ranch," he offered. "Just for a bit? There's water, food." Her eyes narrowed. "Why would you help me?" Cole didn't have an answer that made sense, even to himself. Maybe it was because she looked half dead. Maybe it was because she reminded him of someone. The ghost of his late wife, who died on this same land years ago. Whatever the reason, he only said, "Because I can." After a long silence, she nodded once, and he led her toward his horse. She refused to ride, limping barefoot through dust and thorns as if pain were nothing new to her. When they reached the ranch, dusk had already painted the sky in bruised colors. Cole guided her to the porch and poured water into a tin cup. She drank greedily, tears spilling with each swallow. When he asked her name, she hesitated, then whispered, "Mercy." Cole paused, the words settling between them like a confession. He didn't know if it was her real name, but it fit, fragile, broken, and yet somehow defiant. That night, as he sat by the window watching the stars burn over the desert, he couldn't shake the image of her by the creek, the fear in her eyes, the plea in her voice. Somewhere out there, something had driven her to this. And deep down, Cole Maddox knew this chance meeting was no accident. It was the beginning of something neither of them could escape. The morning after Cole found her by the creek came gray and cold, with a thin mist drifting across the valley. The world seemed quieter than usual. Even the horses in the corral stood still, as if sensing something new had entered their world. Cole rose before dawn, as always, expecting to find the stranger gone. Instead, when he stepped outside, he saw her in the barn, sleeves rolled up, feeding the livestock. She moved with quiet determination, her bare feet leaving light prints in the dirt. Cole watched from the doorway for a moment before speaking. "You don't have to do that," he said. Without looking up, she answered, "I do. I can't just take from you." Her voice was steadier than the night before, but there was still that hollow tremor behind it, the sound of someone who'd forgotten what safety felt like. Cole crossed his arms, leaning against the post. "You can stay a day or two, long enough to rest. Then you can decide where to head next." She finally turned toward him. Her face was cleaner now, though pale, her features sharp from hunger. There was a strength in her eyes that didn't match the frailty of her body. "If I leave," she said quietly, "he'll find me." Cole didn't press her. He'd seen that look before, the haunted gaze of someone running from more than a man. It was the same look soldiers had worn after the war, people who had escaped hell but hadn't yet learned how to live outside it. Inside the house, he prepared breakfast, black coffee, biscuits, and salted pork. When she hesitated at the table, he gestured for her to sit. "You look like you ain't eaten in days," he muttered. "I haven't," she admitted, barely above a whisper. As she ate, Cole noticed her hands trembled every time the wind rattled the window. Her wrists were thin, marked with faint bruises. She caught him looking once and pulled her sleeves down quickly. After the meal, she helped him repair a section of the fence that had collapsed. Cole worked in silence, occasionally glancing at her. She handled the hammer with the awkwardness of someone unaccustomed to hard labor but determined to prove herself. "Mercy," he said finally, testing the name she'd given. "That your real name?" A faint smile touched her lips. "It's the one I chose," she said. "The one I pray for." The words struck him harder than she could have known. He didn't ask more. Everyone in the frontier had a story. Most were painful, and most were better left untold. By sunset, they'd fixed the fence and brought the horses back in. Cole noticed how she lingered near the animals, gently stroking one's muzzle as though she drew comfort from its quiet warmth. It had been years since anyone else had walked this ranch besides him. Her presence unsettled him, but not in a way he disliked. That night, as the fire cracked in the hearth, she sat on the floor near the flames, staring into them like someone searching for answers. Cole poured 2 mugs of coffee and handed her one. "You can rest here as long as you need," he said. Her eyes flickered up to meet his, cautious and uncertain. "You don't even know who I am," she said. "Why trust me?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Because I don't need to," he replied. "A person running from something like that, they've already been punished enough." For the first time, Mercy's lips parted into something like a smile, though it trembled at the edges. The ranch, silent for years since Cole's wife's death, now held a new heartbeat. When the wind picked up outside, Mercy's expression shifted. She turned toward the dark window, her shoulders tightening as if she expected someone to appear from the night. Cole noticed, and his hand drifted toward the rifle leaning by the door. In that moment, both of them understood. Whatever Mercy had fled from wasn't gone. It was coming, and soon. By the 3rd morning, Mercy had started to look less like a fugitive and more like someone who might have belonged there all along. Her hair was combed, her face had a touch of color, and she'd begun humming softly as she worked. The rhythm of ranch life, feeding chickens, hauling water, mending fences, gave her hands something to do and her mind something to quiet. Cole didn't ask questions. He just let her be. But peace never lasts long on the frontier. The sound of hooves broke the morning calm, slow, deliberate, and far too official to be a neighbor. Cole was at the corral when the rider came into view. Sheriff Dalton, a broad-shouldered man with a sun-beaten face and eyes that missed nothing. Behind him, a small dust cloud followed like a shadow. "Morning, Cole," the sheriff called as he dismounted. His tone was easy, but the set of his jaw wasn't. "Heard you been keeping to yourself lately." Cole wiped the sweat from his brow and nodded toward the porch. "Ain't much to keep company with out here." Dalton chuckled, though his gaze swept across the ranch, the barn, the chicken coop, the open door of the house. "Mind if I step inside? Got a bit of a matter to discuss." Cole hesitated just long enough for Dalton to notice. That pause, short as it was, carried weight. Still, he led the sheriff to the porch. Inside, Mercy was sweeping the floor, her back to the doorway. When she heard the boots on the wood, she froze. The broom handle trembled in her hand. Dalton removed his hat politely. "Ma'am," he said. Mercy turned, eyes wide but composed. "Sheriff," she murmured, lowering her head. Dalton's eyes narrowed just a fraction. You from around here?" Cole stepped in before she could answer. "She's been helping with chores. Picked her up on the trail a few days back. Headed west, I reckon." The sheriff rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "That so? Funny thing, we've been looking for a woman. Disappeared from over near the Ward estate. Silas Ward's wife, they say. Went missing after some kind of domestic trouble." The name hit Mercy like a lash. Her breath caught, and she gripped the table for balance. Cole noticed. Dalton did too. Cole shrugged. "Ward's got trouble in every direction. Maybe his wife finally got tired of his kind of living?" Dalton gave him a slow look, a hint of suspicion behind his half-smile. "Maybe so. Ward's offering a handsome bounty for her safe return, though. Says she's sick in the head, liable to hurt herself. Or others." Cole's eyes hardened. "I don't do bounty work." The sheriff studied him a long moment before tipping his hat. "Didn't think you did. But if you happen to see anyone out of place, I'd appreciate a word." He paused, glancing once more at Mercy. "We all got to look out for each other, don't we?" After he left, dust swirling in his wake, the silence felt suffocating. Mercy sank onto the chair, trembling. "He knows," she whispered. "He'll tell Ward." Cole stood at the window, watching the sheriff disappear down the road. "Let him," he said quietly. "I'll handle it." Tears welled in Mercy's eyes. "You don't understand. Ward isn't just a man. He owns people. He owns the law." Cole turned toward her, his jaw tight. "He doesn't own me." The way he said it left no room for doubt. Mercy looked at him as if seeing him for the first time. Not just a rancher, but a man who'd lost enough to stop fearing anything. That night, the ranch felt different. The sky was too quiet. The crickets didn't sing. Mercy sat by the window, her fingers twisting the frayed edge of Cole's coat. In the distance, thunder rolled, or maybe it was the echo of hooves on hard ground. Cole stood on the porch, rifle resting in his hands, eyes fixed on the dark hills. Somewhere out there he knew Silas Ward had just learned that his runaway wife was alive and hiding under another man's roof. And that meant the storm was coming. The days that followed the sheriff's visit passed under a veil of tension. Mercy barely slept, jumping at every distant hoofbeat, every creak of the old ranch house. Cole tried to keep her busy, mending tack, feeding stock, hauling water, but even work couldn't chase the fear from her eyes. One evening, as twilight spread across the plains, a fever took her. It came sudden and hard. Cole found her slumped in the barn, pale as milk, shivering though the air was warm. He carried her inside, laid her on the cot by the fire, and pressed a wet cloth to her forehead. Her breath came in gasps, words tumbling out half-formed, names, pleas, fragments of the life she'd tried to bury. Cole sat beside her through the night, listening to her restless murmurs, and from them a story began to take shape, one soaked in cruelty and pain. Through broken whispers, Mercy's past unfolded. She had been Mercy Ward, wife to Silas Ward, one of the richest men in 3 counties. Her family had once owned a modest ranch neighboring his, but when drought struck and her father died in debt, Silas came with an offer. He'd settle what they owed if she'd marry him. Her mother, desperate and afraid, had agreed. Mercy was 18. At first, Silas played the gentleman, kind, patient, even charming. But that veneer crumbled soon after the wedding. His kindness had been a mask for possession. He treated Mercy like an acquisition, something bought and branded. He decided what she wore, when she spoke, even when she could leave the house. When she resisted, he reminded her who she belonged to. Cole's jaw tightened as she spoke between waves of fever. He'd heard stories of men like Ward, powerful, cruel, untouchable. But hearing it from Mercy, seeing the scars that proofed her body, filled him with a rage he hadn't felt since the war. She spoke of the night she fled. It had been raining, the kind of storm that turned roads to rivers. She had found a letter, proof that Ward had arranged for her mother's death, having seen her as a liability. When Mercy confronted him, he laughed and struck her. That was when she grabbed the small pistol he kept on his desk and pointed it at him. "I should have pulled the trigger," she whispered, tears shining in the firelight. "But I couldn't. I dropped it and ran." Cole didn't answer. He just sat there, eyes fixed on the fire, jaw working. Mercy turned to him weakly. He'll never stop, Cole. Silas doesn't lose things. And he doesn't forgive. Outside, thunder rolled across the dark sky. Cole wrung out the cloth and placed it back on her forehead. Then he'll learn what it's like to lose, he said quietly. Mercy stared at him. There was something in his voice, a cold edge she hadn't heard before. But she saw, too, that his anger wasn't for himself. It was for her. By dawn, her fever broke. She woke to find Cole asleep in the chair beside her, rifle across his lap, as though he'd guarded her all night. She studied his face in the gray light, the deep lines of weariness, the faint scar across his temple. She wondered what ghosts haunted him, what losses had carved that hardness into his expression. When he stirred awake, she smiled faintly. You should have let me die, she said softly. He looked at her, eyes heavy but steady. Not my way, he replied. If death wanted you, it should have come to me first. For the first time, Mercy felt something stronger than fear, a fragile thread of trust. The kind that grows between two broken souls who see the same shadows in each other. But as the morning light crept through the window, Cole saw dust rising far out on the ridge, the telltale sign of riders. Ward's men were already searching, and Cole knew what Mercy didn't yet understand. Her past hadn't just caught up with her. It was about to crash down on both of them. The morning after the gunshot, the air hung heavy with unease. Cole didn't speak much. He didn't need to. The tightness in his jaw and the constant flick of his eyes toward the ridge said enough. Mercy stayed close to the house, patching a torn shirt just to keep her hands busy, but her gaze followed him every time he saddled his horse or scanned the horizon. Cole knew that shot hadn't been a random scare. It was a message, and messages like that were always followed by men with guns. He had no intention of waiting for them to come to his door. At dawn, he saddled his horse, slung his rifle across his back, and told Mercy to stay hidden. If I'm not back by sundown, he said, take the horse and ride north. There's a church near Dry Creek. Tell the preacher there I sent you. Mercy's eyes widened. You're riding into them. I'm riding ahead of them, he corrected. And without another word, he rode out toward Willow Ridge, where the trail from Ward's territory met the open plains. The ride was long and silent, the sun climbing high as Cole followed the faint signs of tracks through the dry grass, hoof prints, cigarette butts, the remnants of a campfire. He moved like a man who had hunted before, his instincts sharp and deliberate. When he reached Willow Ridge, he found what he was looking for. 3 men on horseback, resting near a cluster of rocks. They weren't trying hard to hide. Ward's kind never did. They thought fear did the work for them. Cole tied off his horse quietly and crept along the ridge until he was close enough to hear them talking. Boss says the rancher's stubborn, one of the men was saying. Wants him gone before the end of the week. And the woman? Another asked, spitting into the dirt. The first man laughed. He wants her alive. Said he's got unfinished business with her. Cole's blood ran cold, but his hands were steady. He raised his rifle, exhaled, and fired. The first man dropped instantly. The others dove for cover, returning fire, bullets whistling through the air. Cole ducked behind a boulder, reloaded, and fired again. One rider bolted, wounded, his horse kicking up dust. The last man tried to flank him, and that's when Cole heard a voice he hadn't expected in years. Hold your fire, Maddox. The voice was rough, familiar. Eli Tanner. Cole froze for a moment, lowering his gun slightly. Tanner had been his commanding officer during the war, a man he'd once trusted with his life. But the uniform was long gone. Now he wore a black duster and a smirk that didn't belong to any decent man. Didn't think I'd find you out here, Tanner said, stepping from behind a rock. Ward's paying good coin for that woman. You could walk away richer than you've ever been. Cole's grip on his rifle tightened. You're working for Ward? Tanner shrugged. Man's got to eat. Besides, it's just business. Burning my fields was business? Cole asked coldly. Tanner's smile faded. You were in the way. Cole's reply came with a gunshot. The bullet tore through Tanner's shoulder, sending him sprawling. You still are, Cole muttered. The surviving outlaw scrambled onto his horse and fled, dragging Tanner with him. Cole didn't chase. His shoulder ached, his leg was grazed, and blood ran warm down his side, but he was alive. By the time he returned to the ranch, the sun was bleeding into the horizon. Mercy came running out, eyes wide with fear and relief. "You're hurt," she cried, helping him off the horse. "It's nothing," he muttered, though his voice was hoarse, as she cleaned the wound. He told her everything, about the ambush, about Tanner, about Ward's bounty. When he said Ward wanted her alive, Mercy went still, her hands trembling. "Alive," she whispered. "He doesn't want me back. He wants to punish me." Cole looked at her then, really looked at her, and saw not just fear, but the spark of someone who had nothing left to lose. "Then we stop him before he gets here," he said quietly. Outside, the sky turned black. Far off, a lone wolf howled, and on the distant horizon several faint lights appeared, torches moving in the night. Ward's men were coming. The trap Cole had walked into at Willow Ridge had only delayed them. The real fight was still ahead, and this time it would be fought on his land, on his terms. The night came heavy and windless, the kind of silence that warned of blood to come. Cole could see the faint orange glow of torches flickering in the distance. Ward's men were closing in. The ridge to the south was crawling with shadows, and the dirt trail leading to his ranch glimmered under the moon like a pale scar. Mercy stood beside him on the porch, clutching the rifle he'd given her. She wasn't trembling anymore. The fear that had haunted her eyes since she arrived was gone, replaced by a hard, steady calm. Cole noticed it with quiet respect. Whatever she'd been before, she wasn't helpless now. "We've got maybe an hour," Cole said, loading his Winchester and setting extra ammunition on the rail. "They'll come from the gully, fewer trees there. I'll take the barn. You stay near the back window." Mercy nodded. "And if they surround us?" Cole's lips tightened. "Then we make 'em regret it." He had no illusions about the odds. There were at least 10 men riding for them, maybe more. Ward wasn't the type to send half-measures. He wanted to make an example of Mercy and of the rancher who dared to protect her. Cole's land was quiet except for the wind brushing through dry grass. The horses in the corral stirred uneasily. Inside the barn, he set a lantern near the hayloft, bait, something bright to draw them in. He took position behind a stack of feed sacks, rifle aimed toward the open doors. Then he waited. Minutes dragged. The only sound was his heartbeat, steady and hard. Then, the faint crunch of boots. A low whistle. The sound of men moving in formation. "Fan out!" a voice hissed from the dark. "He's around here somewhere." Cole recognized that voice. Tanner, wounded but alive. Ward must have patched him up fast, and now he was leading the hunt. The first outlaw stepped into the barn, the lantern light catching his face. Cole didn't hesitate. One shot. The man fell, his gun clattering to the floor. Shouts followed, then gunfire. Bullets tore through the wooden walls, splintering the air. Cole ducked, returned fire, and moved before they could pin him down. The barn filled with smoke and the sharp scent of gunpowder. Horses screamed in panic, breaking through the corral fence. Cole rolled behind a wagon wheel and fired again, dropping another man near the door. Meanwhile, Mercy saw shapes moving toward the cabin. 3 of them. She steadied her rifle, just as Cole had shown her, and waited until the first shadow reached the porch. One deep breath. Then she fired. The man dropped instantly. The other 2 hesitated, long enough for her to reload and take the second. The third fled, disappearing into the trees. The gunfire echoed across the valley. Inside the barn, Tanner shouted, "You can't win this, Maddox! Ward's bringing more men!" Cole's reply was a rifle crack that sent Tanner diving behind a hay bale. "Then I'll keep killing him till he runs out," Cole growled. Another explosion, this time behind him. One of Ward's men had set the barn ablaze. Flames licked the dry timbers and the smoke thickened. Cole grabbed his revolver and bolted through the side door, rolling into the dirt as the barn erupted behind him. Mercy was already outside, firing from behind the water trough. Her face was streaked with soot, but her aim was true. Cole joined her, both shooting toward the flickering silhouettes. One by one, the outlaws fell or fled until the night went quiet again. Only one figure remained, Tanner, crawling through the dirt, clutching his shoulder. "You should have taken Ward's offer," he spat. Cole approached slowly, gun raised. "You should have stayed dead." Before Tanner could speak again, Cole pulled the trigger. The shot echoed across the plains, final and cold. For a long moment, there was silence. No horses, no voices, no gunfire. Just the crackle of the burning barn and the wind whistling through the fence posts. Mercy sank to her knees, shaking but alive. Cole knelt beside her, his hand steady on her shoulder. "It's over," he said softly. But she looked up at him with haunted eyes. "No, Cole, it's not. Ward will come himself now. He always does. When he's angry." Cole stared into the flames, his jaw tightening. "Then we'll be ready." In the distance, lightning flashed, a storm brewing on the horizon. It wasn't over. The night had only drawn the first line of a much larger war. The sun hung low over Bitter Wash, a dying town swallowed by dust and decay. What had once been a lively trading post now stood as little more than a cluster of warped buildings and silent saloons. The wind dragged tumbleweeds through the empty main street, whistling against faded signs and broken windows. Cole and Mercy arrived at dusk, their horses moving slowly, cautious and quiet. The air smelled of gun oil and rain-soaked dirt. A storm was brewing again, both in the sky and in the hearts of the two riders who had come for reckoning. Cole dismounted first, tying his horse to a post outside the old sheriff's office. Mercy followed, her eyes scanning every shadow. "He's here?" she asked. Cole nodded grimly. "Ward doesn't hide. He waits." He adjusted his hat and checked his revolver. One final time. The weight of it felt familiar, almost comforting. The last few days had been nothing but survival and blood, but this was justice. They walked together down the deserted street. The saloon doors creaked open with the wind, and from inside came a flicker of lamplight and low laughter. "He's in there," Cole murmured. Mercy's hand brushed his arm. "Cole, what if you don't come out?" He met her gaze, steady, calm, and filled with something softer than he'd ever meant to show. "Then you ride. Don't look back." She shook her head. "Not this time," Cole didn't argue. He simply pushed the saloon doors open. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and whiskey. Half a dozen of Ward's hired men sat at tables, their laughter fading as Cole stepped into the light. At the far end of the room behind the bar sat Silas Ward, clean suit, silver hair, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Well," Ward drawled, swirling his drink. "I was wondering when you'd crawl down here. You've cost me good men, Maddox. Good property." Cole took a few steps forward. "Funny, I don't recall people being property." Ward's smirk hardened. "You wouldn't. You've never built anything that matters. Just a lonely ranch full of ghosts, and a woman who doesn't belong to you." Cole's jaw clenched. "She belongs to no one." Ward stood slowly, setting his glass aside. "You came a long way to die over a whore, Maddox." The word hit Mercy like a slap, but before she could react, Cole's gun was drawn, faster than a blink. "Careful," he said coldly. "Last man who called her that doesn't talk anymore." The room tensed. Ward's men rose from their chairs, hands hovering near their holsters. The saloon went silent except for the faint drip of rain outside. "Don't be stupid, Cole," Ward said smoothly. "You can't shoot your way out of this. You've got 6 bullets. I've got 6 men." Cole tilted his head. "Then we're even." The first shot broke the stillness like thunder. Mercy dove behind a table as chaos erupted. Cole moved with deadly precision, every shot deliberate, every step measured. 2 of Ward's men went down instantly. The others fired wildly, splintering tables and shattering bottles. Ward ducked behind the bar, cursing, while Cole reloaded behind a pillar. Smoke filled the room. Mercy grabbed a fallen revolver and returned fire, catching one gunman in the shoulder. When the gunfire faded, only 3 men remained standing, Cole, Mercy, and Ward. Ward emerged slowly, holding a Derringer pistol, blood splattered on his sleeve. "You really think you're the hero here, Maddox? You're just another killer in a world full of them." Cole stepped closer, boots crunching on broken glass. "Difference is, I kill men like you." Ward raised his gun, but Mercy was faster. Her shot hit him square in the chest. He stumbled back, eyes wide with shock. For a moment he tried to speak, but blood filled his throat instead. He fell against the bar and slid to the floor. The silence that followed was thick and endless. Mercy lowered the gun slowly, her hands shaking. "It's over," she whispered. Cole watched Ward's lifeless body for a long moment, then holstered his weapon. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It's over." But there was no triumph in his voice, only exhaustion. Years of violence and loss had finally come to an end, and the cost was written in every scar and bruise on his body. He turned to Mercy, helping her stand. "You all right?" She nodded, though her eyes glistened with tears. "He can't hurt anyone anymore." "Neither can we," Cole said softly, his gaze distant. "Not after this." They walked out of the saloon into the rain. The storm broke overhead, washing blood and dust from their faces. Lightning lit up the sky as they mounted their horses. Behind them, Bitter Wash was silent, a graveyard for the past they'd finally buried. Cole looked at Mercy as the rain poured down, and for the first time he smiled, tired but real. "Let's go home," he said, and this time Mercy didn't hesitate. The rain finally stopped 3 days after Bitter Wash burned. The clouds drifted apart, leaving the desert clean and golden, the air sharp with the smell of wet sage and ash. The land, scarred and washed by storms, seemed to breathe again, and somewhere beyond those empty miles, a man and woman rode home, bruised, weary, but alive. Cole and Mercy reached the ranch near sundown. What had once been their battleground now looked peaceful under the fading light. The barn was gone, the fences half broken, but the house still stood, a stubborn silhouette against the dying sun. Cole reined in his horse and just sat there for a moment looking at it. Mercy glanced at him quietly. "You still call this place home?" He nodded. "Home's not what you find. It's what you fight to keep." They dismounted and led the horses to the water trough, their steps slow from exhaustion. Inside, the air was cool and still. The gunpowder scent was gone, replaced by the faint sweetness of desert flowers carried in by the wind. Mercy walked through the rooms, her fingers brushing the worn furniture, the cracked walls, the rifle leaning in the corner, reminders of all they'd survived. Cole lit a single lantern. The soft glow filled the room, flickering against his face. He was quieter than usual, his expression unreadable. Mercy could see the weight he carried, not just the battle scars or the blood, but the lives he'd taken and the ghosts that would follow him. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked finally. He looked up. "Which part?" "All of it. Killing Ward, staying to fight, saving me." Cole thought for a long time before answering. "Regrets for folks who had a choice. I did what had to be done." Mercy smiled faintly, though her eyes shone. "And now?" He met her gaze, steady, tired, and unflinching. "Now I live with it." The days passed slowly after that. They rebuilt what they could. Fixed fences, dug a new well, buried the dead. The land began to heal, and so did they. Mercy worked the fields beside him, her hands blistered but steady. Sometimes, when the sun sank low and the wind turned cool, she would hum softly, a tune she couldn't quite remember where she'd learned. One evening, as the sky burned orange and purple, Mercy found Cole sitting on the porch, cleaning his revolver one last time. He wasn't polishing it for use. He was putting it away. "You done fighting?" she asked. He gave a slow nod. "Think I've done enough of it for one life." She stepped closer. "Then what will you do?" He looked out toward the open plains, where the horizon stretched like a promise. "Grow things. Fix what's broken. Maybe learn what peace feels like." Mercy sat beside him, her shoulder brushing his. "You think men like us get peace?" He turned to her with a half smile. "Maybe not. But we can try." A soft silence fell between them, the kind that didn't need words. The crickets sang in the distance. Somewhere far off, thunder rumbled again, but faintly, like a memory instead of a threat. Mercy leaned her head against his shoulder. "I used to dream about freedom," she said quietly. "But I never knew what it meant." "Not until now." Cole looked down at her, his voice low and rough. "Freedom ain't about running. It's about stopping long enough to know you're safe. For the first time in years, Mercy smiled without fear. The weight she'd carried since her captivity had finally lifted. The man who had once been her savior was now simply her partner. Not because he'd rescued her, but because they'd both survived each other's storms. When the last light faded and the stars came out, Cole stood and stretched, the weariness of years melting from his frame. "Tomorrow," he said, "we'll start planning again." Mercy rose beside him, her eyes soft. "You think the land will forgive us?" He glanced out over the dark fields. "The land don't hold grudges. It just waits for something good to grow again." They stood there for a long moment, two broken souls standing on sacred ground reborn by fire and rain. The war was over. The ghosts were quiet. And for the first time, the silence felt like peace. As the wind moved through the fields carrying the scent of fresh earth, Cole reached for Mercy's hand. She didn't pull away. The dust had finally settled, and in its wake, something fragile but enduring began to grow. The kind of freedom that wasn't bought by blood or earned by violence, but found in the quiet after the storm. When two people decided they'd had enough of surviving and were ready at last to live. The morning after the battle was eerily quiet. Smoke still rose from the barn's blackened skeleton, curling into the pale dawn sky like a ghost refusing to leave. The smell of gunpowder and burnt hay clung to everything, the porch, the earth, even the wind. Cole stood in the middle of it all, hands black with soot, eyes scanning the horizon. He had survived the night, but he knew that what was coming next would be worse. Mercy stepped out of the cabin wrapped in one of his coats, her face pale but her eyes alive with determination. "How many?" she asked quietly. Cole didn't answer at first. He was staring at the distant hills, at the faint dust cloud forming on the horizon. "Riders. More of them." "Too many," he finally said. "Ward's bringing the rest," Mercy's breath caught. "You should run." Cole turned to her, his voice hard but calm. "And leave you for him?" She looked down. "He doesn't want you, Cole. He wants me." "I know," he said simply, "and he's not getting you." Those words hung between them, heavy, unspoken, dangerous. For a moment, Mercy didn't know what to say. She had lived her life believing no one would ever stand between her and the men who saw her as property. But Cole wasn't like them. He was stubborn, scarred, and somehow still good. They didn't have much time. Cole began preparing for another fight, methodical as ever. He pulled rifles from under the floorboards, checked his ammunition, and set traps along the fence line. Tripwires, sharpened stakes, hidden revolvers. He knew every inch of his land and intended to use it. Mercy, too, refused to sit idle. She filled canteens, gathered food, and bandaged Cole's reopened wounds from the night before. "You shouldn't move that arm," she warned. He smirked faintly. "Can't exactly shoot sitting still." By midday, thunder began rolling across the plains, the first wave of a storm sweeping in from the west. The sky darkened, painting the world in shades of gray. Cole could feel it, nature itself preparing for the reckoning ahead. Then came the sound. Horses. A deep, rhythmic pounding that made the ground tremble. Ward had arrived. Cole and Mercy stood side by side behind the broken fence as nearly a dozen riders appeared over the ridge. At their head rode Silas Ward, dressed in a long black coat that billowed in the wind like a preacher's robe. His face was clean-shaven, his hair silver at the temples. The look of a man who believed himself untouchable. He rode forward alone, stopping just short of the burned barn. "Cole Maddox," he called out, voice smooth as oil. "You've made quite the mess." Cole didn't answer, rifle raised but steady. Ward smiled, his eyes sliding toward Mercy. "And there she is, my runaway dove. You cost me a lot of time, girl. Come now, you know how this ends. Don't make it harder." Mercy stepped forward, surprising Cole. "You think you own everything you touch, don't you, Ward? But you don't own me. Not anymore," Ward chuckled, slow and cruel. "You were born into debt, sweetheart. I just collected what was owed." Cole's voice cut through the wind. "You'll collect lead if you don't ride out of here." Ward's smirk vanished. He raised his hand, a signal. Instantly, gunfire erupted. The storm broke in full fury. Thunder rolled overhead as bullets tore through the ranch. Cole ducked behind a trough, returning fire with precision. He hit one rider, then another, reloading between flashes of lightning. Mercy fired from the cabin window, her shots sharper and steadier than before. Rain began to fall, mixing with the smoke and dust, turning the ground to mud. Horses screamed and bucked. One of Ward's men caught fire when lightning struck near the barn ruins. The chaos was biblical. Ward himself stayed mounted, calm amid the storm, firing methodically at Cole's position. A bullet grazed Cole's ribs, knocking him back. Mercy ran from the cabin, sliding into the mud beside him. "You're hit!" she shouted. "Just a scratch," he grunted, blood darkening his shirt. "Cole, we can't hold this!" He looked toward the ridge and saw something he hadn't expected. Two riders approaching fast, guns blazing. Not Ward's men, neighbors, ranchers from Dry Creek who'd heard the fight. The tide turned fast. Ward's men began falling back under the combined gunfire. Ward cursed, wheeled his horse, and disappeared into the rain, leaving his men behind. When it was over, Cole could barely stand. He leaned against Mercy, soaked and bleeding but alive. Ward had escaped, but his retreat meant something. He wasn't finished, not by a long shot. The storm had broken, but the war between them had only just begun. Cole turned to Mercy, rain streaming down his face. "Next time," he said, "we take the fight to him." And for the first time since she'd fled Ward's grasp, Mercy didn't look afraid. She just nodded. "Then we end it." The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the land drenched and still. Steam rose from the ground as the sun pushed through the clouds, but nothing about the day felt new or clean. Cole's ranch was a ruin. The barn burned, the fences broken, the soil scarred by boot tracks and bullets. What was once a home now looked like a battlefield. Cole sat on the porch steps, shirt half torn and blood seeping through the bandage around his ribs. Every breath hurt. Every movement reminded him of what they'd lost. But he was alive. Mercy was alive. That had to count for something. Inside, Mercy was quietly cleaning up the wreckage. Broken dishes, shattered glass, scattered supplies. She didn't speak much. The silence between them was heavy but not empty. It was the silence of two people trying to understand what survival really meant. When she finally stepped outside, her eyes met Cole's. "You should see to that wound again," she said softly. "I've had worse," he replied. "Maybe," she said, sitting beside him, "but worse doesn't mean you should ignore it." He gave a faint smile. "You sound like a wife." The words slipped out before he realized it, and Mercy froze. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she laughed quietly, a sound filled with disbelief and something tender. "I don't think I'd make much of one." Cole looked at her, really looked at her. The dirt on her face, the bruises fading on her arms, the defiance in her eyes that hadn't been there when she first arrived. "You're doing fine so far," he said simply. But the fragile peace didn't last. That afternoon, two riders appeared, neighbors from Dry Creek, the same men who'd helped drive Ward's men off during the storm. They brought supplies and grim news. "Ward's stirring up the county," one of them said. "Told the sheriff you're hiding a fugitive. He's got papers, forged maybe, but official enough to make trouble." Cole's jaw tightened. "So he's turned the law against us." "Worse," the man said. "He's paying every drifter and bounty hunter this side of the border to find her." Mercy's face went pale. "He won't stop, will he?" Cole stood, pain forgotten. "No. Men like Ward don't stop until you make them." That night, as the sky darkened again, Cole began packing a saddlebag. Ammunition, food, maps, and the few things that hadn't burned. Mercy watched from the doorway, uncertain. "Where are you going?" she asked. "To finish this," he said without hesitation. "Ward's holed up in his trading post near Bitter Wash. He's not coming here again. I'm going to him." Her voice trembled. "You can't go alone." Cole looked at her, the flicker of the lamp reflecting in his eyes. "I've been alone most of my life, Mercy. It's easier that way." She stepped closer. "Not anymore." He hesitated, the kind of hesitation that could change everything, then shook his head. He's not just another outlaw. Ward owns half the men between here and the border. If you come with me, you'll die. I almost did, remember? She said fiercely. I'm tired of running. If you ride out that gate, I ride with you. Cole stared at her for a long moment before finally sighing. You're stubborn. Learned from the best. By dawn, the two of them were riding south. The horizon stretched wide and empty, the land scarred by storms but glowing faintly under the rising sun. The road to Bitter Wash was long and dangerous, cutting through canyons and outlaw country. But Cole rode with a purpose he hadn't felt in years. As they traveled, Mercy asked quietly, "What happens when you find him?" Cole's voice was low and certain. "I end it. One way or another." She nodded, gripping the reins tighter. "And if it costs you your life?" He glanced at her, the corner of his mouth twitching. "Freedom's always got a price. Might as well pay it on my terms." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of desert rain and dust. Somewhere beyond the next ridge lay Bitter Wash, and the man who had turned their lives into war. Cole knew that facing Ward meant walking straight into death. But as he glanced at Mercy beside him, her face set with quiet resolve, he realized something unexpected for the first time in years. He wasn't fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for someone worth dying for. And that, he decided, was worth every drop of blood the price of freedom demanded.